Thank you so much for staying tuned to CAS TV. Welcome to the Conservation Conversation. My name is Chemtai Kirui. Today on the program, I'm bringing you the report from Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire, where the conference of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification closes its curtain. The heads of states and government meeting at the United Nations Global Conference on Land have called on the international community to take urgent action to stem the loss of life and livelihood that communities all over the world are experiencing due to the increasing and devastating impacts of desertification, land degradation, and drought. There has been vigorous activities taking place in the conference, with delegates negotiating the appropriate set of decisions they need to adopt in order for them to guide in the fight to combat desertification. Here are the highlights of the conference, which brought together governments, scientists, policymakers, private sectors, activists, and communities. We begin with the story of gender equality, where the representatives from across 196 countries gathered in Abidjan at the Gender Caucus of the 15th session of the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, who pledged to promote gender equality as a means of accelerating land restoration. The delegates said they acknowledge that land remains among the most fundamental asset for most of the women and men living in developing countries, and that securing women's access to land and control over land and access to finance for land-based economic activities are central components of women's economic empowerment and women's rights, generating opportunities for economic prosperity and autonomy. The delegates, among other pledges, said that they will commit to working towards the inclusion of gender equality criteria in the development and granting of finance for sustainable land management, land restoration, and drought preparedness and resilience at regional, national, subnational, and local levels, and they called upon the COP of the UNCCD to incorporate these commitments into their deliberation around the gendered aspects and into their policy decisions accordingly. The issue of sand and dust storms, which is a key concern in Kenya, especially the northern eastern part of Kenya, Wajir, which last month experienced huge sandstorm, was discussed in this year's UNCCD COP15. Fueled by climate change, land degradation and drought, sand and storms can damage crop, kill livestock, and strip topsoil and affect human health, as well as disrupt transportation, supply chains, and power networks. UNCCD and its partners have developed a comprehensive sand and dust storms compendium, information and guidance on assessing and addressing risks, launched during the SDS Day at the UNCCD COP15. Created with the help of over 50 experts, national focal points, and the United Nations agencies, the new compendium complements the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification policy and advocacy framework for the effective management and understanding of the sand and dust storms issues. We also look at the UNCCD COP15 Rio Convention Pavilion, which hosted its first ever food day, where representatives of international organizations, civil society, and the indigenous leaders discussed the science and approaches that they can help reshape our relationship with the land to secure the future of our food. The issue of hunger is a current struggle in the country. Thousands, if not millions, of Kenyans are going to bed hungry, and the ongoing campaign to feed the nation is a clear indication as to why this launch of Food Day was long time coming. During the launch, the indigenous activists from Kenya and Chad presented the perspectives of their communities, for whom land is their culture, identity, and life-giving source. They stressed that securing women's right to secure and equal access to land is a key incentive for sustainable land management, together with strong legislations adapted to the needs of ecosystems and local communities. The 15th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification theme has been focused on the restoration of 1 billion hectares of degraded land between now and 2030. They also looked at future-proofing land use against the impacts of climate change and tackling escalating droughts, sand and dust storms, wildfires, and other disaster risks. Ibrahim Thiaw, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification Executive Secretary, he said, and I quote, "We all must live up to our responsibility to ensure the health of present and future generations wholeheartedly and without delay." I have to mention that on June 17th of next month, the United Nations will feature UN Desertification and Drought Day, which will be hosted by Madrid in Spain. So what was the consensus of this 11-day-long conference? Number one, to restore 1 billion hectares of degraded land between now and 2030. They also pledged to boost drought preparedness, response, and resilience. They also agreed to future-proof land use against the impacts of climate change. They talked about how they're going to tackle escalating disaster risks, such as sand and dust storms, to address desertification and land degradation as drivers of forced migration and displacement. They also agreed to strengthen land rights and gender equality as important enablers for effective land restoration, and to promote decent land-based jobs for youth and strengthen youth participation in the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification processes. And in addition to that, the formal COP15 decisions to political declaration were issued, namely the Abidjan call issued by the heads of states and government attending the summit hosted by Cote d'Ivoire President Alassane Ouattara on 9th May, and the Abidjan Declaration on Achieving Gender Equality for Successful Land Restoration, which emerged the Gender Caucus chaired by the First Lady Dominica Ouattara. We come to the end of the 11th day reporting on the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification on its 15th meeting, also known as the UNCCD COP15. I have to acknowledge the support of Internews Art Journalism Network for making my fellowship report a possibility. Thank you so much for staying tuned since the beginning up until this time. Keep on watching CAST TV. I'm Kimnat at Night.